So I'm here to talk about the kind of the why and how of diversity audits, and include a little bit about some of the traps that can be found in them. This originated, I'm interning at the Macon Memorial Library. I'm interning with Erica. I know this is something that she's passionate about. And when I was going through, we did an in-service project, which is where this originated. And we talked about various different things, but this was one that we were both pretty passionate about, and I'm really interested in where kind of theory meets practice, like how you can transition from, oh, this is a great idea, here's how this is good, but like how do you transform it into actionable things. So let's start off with kind of the why. So this is an infographic here that the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the School of Education created, and it's from 2018, so it's a little bit older, but it's going through how many books feature main characters from different groups, and one of the key points is that animals beat out everyone of color combined, which isn't necessarily terrible as long as you're taking the equal amount at least from the dominant group, but it really illustrates really well kind of the mirrors and windows theory, where everyone deserves to get to see themselves in books and to see them represented in numerous ways that kind of reflect everything. And that's great for everyone, but what you end up with when you're struggling so hard with only 5% of books that Latinx people are not able to find books featuring themselves, and white people end up with everything centered about them. So then they end up confused later when they're questioning, oh, why does this character have to be a female? Why does this character have to be black? Instead of just assuming, oh, this character is this and that's fine. And the other aspect, of course, is everyone deserves to get to, and everyone needs to see everyone else, and that's kind of where the windows come in. You need to see them as complete people and not as stereotypes, and get to see that they get to live not only their unique issues, but also just normal lives, just like everyone else. And this is just kind of going over why you should audit. It's diversity, equity, inclusion are important. They're important aspects, and they're important enough to be a priority. And for them, you really need to know where you're at to figure out where you're going, and to see how good you're doing currently, to see how you can make up for it, and to try to change your practices to whatever you're blind to. And figure out where those blind spots are, because you could be doing great in numerous areas, but if you're completely missing on something else, you don't necessarily know it until you go back and you audit. And this is just a few things you can look for in an audit. Adoption and foster background, own voices, intersectionality, culture and religion, LGBTQ. There's tons and tons of different things you can look for. And own voices is particularly interesting. We'll go into that a little bit more later, because that's just kind of one of the traps you can run into. But let's go over the different types of diversity audits. So there's the total department, sectional, reverse, and order audits. And I'll go into those a little bit individually. The total or department audits, that's looking at every single book for any individual, whatever you're looking for on that particular audit. It could be one thing, it could be multiple things. And of course, that's really going to be time consuming, but it's going to provide the most complete picture. But it's not going to be applicable to most libraries, especially larger libraries that aren't super well funded. It would eat up a lot of time. So it's often not going to be practical, but it would be really, really useful. Then you're looking at sectional audits. That's where you're taking just sections or slices and going through and saying, all right, we're going to take these 100 books this month, we're going to audit them, we're going to record the data, and then we're going to say, okay, if we extrapolated this over our entire collection, we've got about 5% of our books are representing people of color. And then you can just keep doing that over and over again, and you'll get a better and better picture. But especially initially, you can end up with really, skewed results, especially if you're looking in like simple ways by looking like by alphabet. If you end up near Patterson or something, and you're looking at just 100 block books, you got to jump a bunch of James Patterson novels. It's not going to give you a very clear picture. But it's still very useful and can really help establish where you are, especially if you're continuously doing them and adding to them. Reverse audits are really interesting to me. You're, in theory, looking at something like a Stonewall or a Rainbow list. You find those award-winning books, preferably from a list you don't look at very often, and then you go back and you look at how many of those books are featured in your collection to see, all right, we're getting about half of these books through our natural progression, however you're figuring out what books you're going to order. But of course, if you're regularly staring at those and continuously checking in, then you're going to have most of those books anyway. And then we've got what I would say are the order audits. That's like the easiest one to just start incorporating them. Every single time you're ordering, you're making sure, okay, if I'm ordering 100 books, I want to make sure I at least have one that's dealing with someone who's going through some sort of socioeconomic issues. You want to make sure that you have at least 3 that are covering this topic, at least 5, and then if you're ever short, you can record that, so in the future, you know that you're behind on that metric. And then if you're keeping up with these audits, you can know how you've done for that year and what direction that your total collection is headed. And then I just grabbed the some data about Burlington. You're looking at it and it gets a little bit complicated because you can't, you're not going to hit exactly these numbers, especially when you're bringing in books like in the children's books where you're going to have a lot of books about, an elephant being delightful in some way. But you're looking at 57.8% are white, 27.7% are black or African American, 17.8 are Latino. So it's just a good idea to get a good metric of what your patron base is. But of course that gets more complicated when you're looking at less obvious diversity aspects, because there's just not going to be a complete picture for how many LGBTQ people are in your community. What do they look like? They can be as simple as taking a shelf list, putting it into Excel, and then getting Envoys, whatever, people of color, LGBTQ, and going through and auditing it. This is a shelf list from the large print books in Richard Thornton Library that I'm going through, and I just kind of stopped after I got, just trying to get a picture. This ends up being about 9% of people of color writing in their own voices, which is not an accurate reflection of Oxford's demographic as a whole, because they're also around 30%. Of course, diversity is complicated. I want to go into a few of the complicated issues about that. The definition of diversity is always going to be political, and it's also going to be local to your individual library, even within a library system, because you're going to be serving different patron bases. The libraries are always going to be changing. I want to talk about own voices just a little bit. It's been co-opted. It's a kind of a catch-all marketing term now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it means that they at least acknowledge that people care and they want to provide books that are, by African Americans, featuring African American characters. But it gets a little bit complicated because there's a lot of different ones, and just kind of own voices doesn't cover it all. And of course, you want to provide a more complete picture. Not every single book about someone who's Jewish needs to be about the Holocaust. Does every single book featuring a Latinx character, does it revolve around an immigration issue? You want to be able to provide a complete picture of more than just one aspect of their unique struggles. We need to see them doing everyday things, going on adventures, being a spy, having a romance with a fairy queen or something. Publishing trends are changing. This was just a nice infographic from Lee and Low Books, where it kind of does show that there are more and more books featuring people of color and multicultural content. But unfortunately, less than a quarter of the books featuring multicultural content were written in 2017, were written by Black, Latino, and Native authors. So even though 31% do cover those areas, then I would include Asian as well. But it does mean that if you're just grabbing random books featuring those characters and you're not looking for own voices, looking for people writing for their own experiences, you could just still end up with not encouraging and not providing any books by people of color featuring characters like themselves. And then so there's just a few places where you can look to find diverse literature, and then just some additional information. Anyone have any questions?
Is this going to be shared with our collection development manager?
I can share it with whoever.
Okay, I think it should be. Yeah.
And I'm happy to re-record it, so it's just kind of a voiceover and not an awkward phone one for class. So y'all can share it to them and, you know, add your thoughts, and if y'all have any thoughts about what I could change, maybe y'all a little piece of paper filled with 5 questions, well, I think I only grade 5 or 6 of them. But if y'all could fill those out, and then I could modify it in whatever way that, y'all encourage me to.
I was even thinking with like shelf reading, kind of just like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
changing that around.
I'll send one to you, Kathy. Because that ain't bad enough. You can turn it off.